So you're a high school kid, you love skateboarding, you're having a great life, you're pretty good in school to the point to where you decide you want to go to medical school. Everything's going great, you start out, mom and dad are doing well, but then the economy turns and you have to leave medical school. So you answer an ad in the newspaper, kind of vague, looking for somebody to do some sort of security type work. You end up getting trained in an abandoned prison. And then you find yourself, after going through that training, being drafted into a specialized paramilitary unit whose job it is to hunt the cartel. That's what today's guest did. An accidental tourist into anti-cartel fighting. It's a fascinating story. But before we get into it, if you are ready to put a plan together for you and your family, listen, folks, it's only going to get more challenging in these next coming years. So you need a plan to minimize the chance of violence getting in your life. Go to timlarkin.com, give us your email, and we will start you off on a training course right away, absolutely free. But you've got to take that work. So timlarkin.com, give us your email. Okay, today's interview. I've been waiting a long time to get on an interview with Ed Calderon. I've followed him for a while. We know a lot of the same people. I was hoping to present with him at a symposium, but we missed each other. He's a fascinating individual. You heard what I said. Yeah, he was a skateboarder. He had no intention of getting to law enforcement, let alone anti-cartel work. He was trying to be a medical student and just didn't work out. And he happenstanced into this unit. And it's just an amazing story. But he's right now probably one of the top people on the cartel information, informing us. And when you hear this interview, you're going to wonder, how the hell is it that we're spending so much time spending $40 billion and sending it over to the Ukraine when we've got true serious threats to our national security, to our health, and just the criminality of it all. And yet we're not really paying attention. That's why I wanted to get Ed on today. So listen, this interview is going to be in three parts. One, I'm going to have Ed give you guys a current update of everything that's going on. Then I'm going to talk about, Ed's training and how he went through, training for violence and the violence of the cartel, explaining where it comes from. Why are they so savage in their violence and, the history of that. He gives some really good insights into that. And then I'm going to talk to him about the toll of the op tempo. When you hear what his op tempo was, it was amazing. And the fact that they had zero, it's bad enough here in the US, but they had zero idea of post-traumatic stress syndrome, how to take care of it. He explains all of that. And he explains the toll that it took, not only on him, but on many of the people that he operated with. And I think that's a really, really important message. And then we end up with Hollywood's ability to glamorize some really savage criminals. And Ed makes some really great points at the end about, what the problem is and who these people really are. So listen, I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed the talk. Also, Ed, that one picture that you see right there is one of Ed's courses that he does. I am looking to host Ed when he comes to Las Vegas in 2023. We're working out some opportunities. I'm going to have him do some law enforcement training, but I also want to offer some courses that will be open to you. This guy is a fascinating individual. He has excellent information, and I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. So, Ed Calderon. Ed, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for the invitation. It's awesome.
Hey, can you, there's been a lot of, I've been watching a lot of the stuff on Telegram, and I follow a lot of the people that you've, made me aware of. And there's been a lot of activity down in Mexico lately. And as I was telling you before we started this, I think it's amazing that we as a country are so focused on the Ukraine right now, sending all this money over there. And we have, for the vast majority of Americans, have no idea what's happening literally right across our border, and how much Mexico has an influence on what goes on here in the U.S. And I don't think they have any idea the level of control that the cartels are having in some of these cities and some of the activities. Could you just give us a current status of what's going on amongst the cartels right now, the type of violence and the level of equipment that they're able to use and bring to bear on their own people and literally in towns?
Yeah, of course. I mean, most Americans have their education when it comes to cartels come from Netflix. That's the sad truth, not from the news, but mostly fiction. And to a lot of Americans that know a little bit of cartels, they'll say, "Oh, the Sinaloa cartel, the Chapo Guzman," and a lot of keywords and phrases and groups. Well, the truth of the matter is that the Sinaloa cartel, as we knew it, probably doesn't exist anymore. What it is now is a fractured group of small family units that have historical control over trafficking routes and connections and distribution routes in the United States. They're working together in small ways, but they're very fractured. The capture of El Chapo Guzman did absolutely nothing to either slow down or to affect the operations of his family and some of the other cartel groups he works with. The United States put him as a figurehead for this cartel, and he was not even number 3 in the scale of things as far as importance. What we're seeing now is a fractured cartel in the form of the Sinaloa cartel, which will create power vacuums, and it has created power vacuums, and it has created an opportunity for one of the largest and fastest growing cartel organizations on the planet right now, the Cartel de Jalisco de Nueva Generación, the New Generation Cartel, to take over vast amounts of territories, including that of Baja and Tijuana, including that of parts of the Gulf now, absorbing elements of the once dominant Gulf cartel, and even moving south to take control over operations of not only trafficking cocaine from southern countries, but also now setting up shop there as far as them controlling their own plantations when it comes to coca leaf, when it comes to heroin in certain parts of Michoacan, when it comes to finally the big moneymaker for all of them, fentanyl. This new generation cartel holds control over most of the ports in Mexico, most of the major ones. You talk about the American perception of the Ukraine, and seeing Americans sending NATO sending ballistic missiles and anti missile technology and anti-tank technology. Well, there's a country sending fentanyl into Mexico in very much kind of the same way as a proxy war in a lot of ways. Cartels use Chinese banking apps. That's no secret to anybody. Most of their financials are moved through Chinese banking institutions to try and conceal and or completely cover up the movement of money from one point to another. And this is done in full view and knowledge base for the Chinese government. Even when COVID was happening, the ports still, for some reason, received shipments in places like Manzanillo, in Colima, central Mexico, on the Pacific side. So you can observe a Sinaloa cartel that it has to smuggle fentanyl from San Diego across the border to infuse its product in Mexico. A desperate cartel. And then you see another cartel that ramps up production even when COVID is happening. I think what you're seeing in Mexico is a proxy war of a sort. You see a waning and diminishing Sinaloa cartel that historically, I'm not the first one to say it, but apparently has had some sort of interactions with certain levels of the government in the United States. It seems to be made deals at some point or another during the 80s and the 90s when it grew. You're seeing it go up against a giant, fast-growing cartel that now is displaying technologies like, remote guided rockets. Their man pads are now being found in the hands of some of these new generation cartel forces. Chinese originated civilian drones that are being utilized in very nefarious ways. Um, uh, Wish.com versions of night vision, but they're still night vision, being showcased in the hands of some of these cartel forces now that are operating, all over central Mexico and along the border. And finally, I mean, the sophistication being shown by this new generation cartel, as far as it's almost, I don't know, there's some sort of sophistication when it comes to their training and their organization. You see them carry out operations wearing signal disruptors that are, commonly showcased in the use of special operations when they're working in environments where they want to cut in communications out of the area. These guys are wearing some of that equipment now. They've mounted them drones so they can actually do it remotely now. You're seeing a sophistication and a trend towards militaristic or guerrilla warfare, fourth generation warfare type activity with some of these people, where they're trying to develop advantages, but not against the government. This is the key thing here that should be alarming to people. The advances in weaponry and tactics and how they're getting more and more sophisticated, it has absolutely nothing to do with them fighting the government for control over the territories. And if people want to see a very clear case of this, in Michoacan right now, the state of Michoacan, where most of the avocados that you put on your on your burrito and your toast come from, as Americans, if you want to have a physical connection to this. That there is a currently trench warfare happening in Michoacan, like actual trenches buried and positions being fought over. On one side, Los Carteles Unidos and the federal government. Los Carteles Unidos is basically all that's left of the cartels that they have gone after. I mean the new generation cartel. Said, well, let's just pull our resources together to try and defend these guys from coming in. And the federal forces are saying, well, we're at number two. Let's join your side. So you're seeing a fight between this alliedship of cartels, the federal government, with the army and the National Guard, fighting this cartel organization that is displaying very much military maneuvers now in central Mexico. This is the current trend. Mexico federal government is hands off with cartels now. Every now and then you'll see an arrest made. You'll see some sort of detention by the military, but none of these are anything that anybody that knows what they're looking at. None of these are high impact or blows to the cartels. I mean, these are. The policy of the federal government right now in Mexico is abrazos, no balazos. So hugs, not bullets. They have rights too. They're human too. Why would you want to attack them? Coincidentally enough, it's a leftist government in Mexico right now. We just federally legalized abortions. We just there's a Che Guevara statue erected in Mexico City, and there's a bunch of stuff happening right now in Mexico that are changing kind of fundamentally the country. But among all of these, I mean, it's the violence. It's never been as dangerous as it is right now to be a Mexican citizen. As far as even the numbers are hard to track. When it comes to reported deaths by the federal government related to cartel violence in general, Mexico is a place where over 90% of murders are never solved. So it's a target-rich environment for any sociopath.
Yeah.
And then you have the adage added that, clandestine graves are found daily. So we have no idea how many of the missing are actually dead. Uh, it's a, it's a, it's a pretty surreal thing to live through and currently live through. As people are putting flags, Ukrainian flags on their profile pictures, that in the first probably 3 days or 4 days of that war, Mexico beat that war zone in deaths, in violent deaths, and we're
Yeah.
right next to the United States. Right? And
That's what caught me was like, it's amazing to me that that's not more widely known. And the other thing, Ed, I remember in another interview I heard, oftentimes they're, as you said, you got these clandestine raids that go in, and then oftentimes they get rid of all the bodies. The bodies just disappear.
Yeah,
Because they don't leave any evidence. I mean, it's really, it's like, it's almost like if you didn't know it really happened, you'd think it was like a really like over the top Hollywood movie, you know?
Yeah, I had the experience of looking for some of the clandestine dumping sites that El Pozolero left behind. El Pozolero, the stew maker, was like an infamous cartel.
Yeah.
He wasn't a hitman. There's rumors of him being a hitman and stuff like that. He was just basically he was just providing a service. He would use caustic soda and drums to basically get rid of the bodies. Getting rid of anywhere from 5 to 12 bodies a night. Using caustic soda, basically. I'm not here to show you how that's done, but basically you would eliminate the parts that are more recognizable, and the rest basically gets turned into goo with this acid bath, basically. And then it would get dumped into a sand grader. And anything that gets left that's too big might be recognized, gets put back into the process. These people are gone, like gone. Some we found some IDs, we found some discarded underwear, socks, pants. I think among all the stuff that I found in some of these dump sites, I think that really struck me was a bracelet that I know for a fact was probably made by a girl in school for his dad. One of those that says "Papa" on it.
Right.
Little square letters. What is this doing here in the middle of a field with jeans and sneakers that are covered in what appears to be blood and other bodily fluids of somebody that's in fear for the last moments of terror in their lives? It tells a story, and this is happening. If I grab a cab from where I was, it would take me less than 15 minutes to be at the San Isidro border.
That's crazy. That's the thing that's amazing to me is the level of ingenuity that they have with that. I remember years ago also there was a series of pictures that I saw of I don't know if it was Mexico or somebody, it was another guy who was a cleaner, and he was up in a mountain area and he's just chipping away and he's throwing things out, and tons of vultures and birds of prey around, just eating up the bodies. And he was just going to work. That was it. That was his only job, was to make sure that everything was unrecognizable and just no trace left. And it was very methodical and accepted. That's the one thing that is amazing, is how it's almost like, I hate to say like industrialized, but it's like it's really mechanized. I mean, it's a industry, that they're doing to be able to do it. It's not a one-off thing where a couple of guys are doing stuff. This is, this is something that they go in, they do their killing for whatever they're doing, and then they have the group that comes in and cleans everything up and just disappears.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys are drawn from industry or from rural areas. I mean, I had some experience in a pig farm growing up myself, and I remember getting taught by some knife karate guys how to stab somebody, and one of them told me, your knife has to be sideways so it goes through a rib cage, or else it will get stuck. And I've dispatched many a pig in my time, right? So I knew that was probably not factual, and they got kind of freaked out with the details, right? But that was how I grew up. And there's elements of that in the characters that you encounter out there that have that background, that knowledge of, that base knowledge of being able to do what they need to do with what they have.
Right.
You'll go into towns and they have camera systems set up in the traffic lights, concealed ones that they themselves developed. You'll get the army listening into their phone conversations, so they develop their own cell phone network. And now they have their own deal. And I think a lot of the sophistication that surprises us, that we don't realize that a lot of these guys, what they're doing, a lot of these cartel organizations, is that they're not only investing in the people that they're hiring, but they're also investing in some of the people in their communities to go through careers in medical fields, immigration processes to go to the United States, businesses that get started in the United States by some of these groups and people that they've sponsored and or helped out or fostered. And that's how their tendrils grow,
Right.
I remember having this conversation with a federal law enforcement agent who was asking me how it is possible for somebody in a hillside somewhere in Jalisco to have the ability to call somebody and get a free LASIK procedure done by somebody in the United States, like way up in the north, on the East Coast. And like, how was that possible? Well, I said I would look into the immigration processes of the people that are related to the doctor or the doctor himself. I would look at a little bit about the background of them and see why there is a debt there,
Right.
And lo and behold, the immigration process of most of his family members came from very, they were very quick and fast, and they had a good lawyer, and nobody knows who paid them,
Right.
So this is influence, influence for a LASIK exam, or influence for a border patrol agent to look that way instead of looking this way. This is influence.
Well, that reminds me of I remember, my wife is in law enforcement, and she's they were getting briefed on some cartel activity. And one of the things that group was talking about, that particular law enforcement group was talking about, was sophistication of, now you've got the second generation of a lot of the cartel family members going to, Wharton, Harvard, really good schools, understanding sophisticated financial objectives. And he told one particular story that involved moving basically commodities. I think this one was asparagus. And they used it in such a way that there was never a transfer of money for drugs at that point. Yet they were able to sophisticatedly do it to where everybody knew what was going on, but it was so well done. No laws were violated. There was no way to prove anybody bought drugs. And they said, this is what we're facing. We're facing not only, the immense wealth that the cartel is able to wield now, and the expertise they're able to buy, but now they're able to use sophisticated financial models to avoid, even getting hit that way.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend is something I heard an individual say from a certain cartel as he was talking about some of the ability that they have to move around money through Chinese banking systems and money brokers.
Right.
When you talk about cartel operations in the United States, and in the same tense, you realize that they are utilizing, fentanyl, and some of the derivatives that involve that, and some of the stuff precursors that involve meth and other things. Some of them are produced in Mexico, but not in quality and not in big quantity. All of it comes from China. And China is a state. There's no Chinese cartel working hidden from the government in China, moving things around. So when you see cartel operations in the United States, they are not only facing this criminal organization. If you're law enforcement, you're not only facing this criminal organization, but now you have to realize that you're facing this criminal organization with a support network and backing of a superpower.
Right.
And that is.
And what opened the door for China to really make the inroads to Mexico?
I think a lot of it. Was actually. China has always had a presence in Mexico. China and Mexico have always had a relationship. There's graves, there's pretty old graves with Chinese characters in Tijuana and Mexicali and all over the country. Some of the first heroin production was basically set up by Chinese nationals in Sinaloa, for example, and some of the High Sierra. The skills and knowledge base and some of the ways to do business come from there. Then you have somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, this weird influx of not only money and investment in the pharmaceutical industry in Mexico, but also brokers that bringing some of the precursors for that industry into Mexico from China. Basically Chinese businessmen coming in and basically setting up shop under legitimate guises of producing generic and or affordable medicine for Mexico's exploding old population, young population. Mexico has a big industry of with pharmaceuticals. Anybody that's been to Mexico will see a pharmacy in every corner.
Absolutely.
Because the health system in Mexico is garbage and everybody's self-medicating. That's as simple as that. Nobody has to explain that further than that, right? So desperation will usually have a church in every corner and a pharmacy in every corner. This is how it works. You have a group, like you have a perfect storm of businesses coming in, setting up shop, legitimate pharmaceutical businesses setting up shop, and basically leaving a giant door open for meth precursors to be put into the country. It started off with meth when it came to some of the stuff that you start seeing being produced, meth and the precursors to make it. We're talking about not the meth that you would make in Alabama in a trailer park. I mean, people who've seen Breaking Bad will have a notion of the quality that started getting produced and the amounts of it, because these are industrial plants now producing some of the meth that fed the meth epidemic in the United States or during the late 90s and 2000s. Then you have a perfect storm happen. Marijuana legalization in some of the major drug markets in the United States. I mean, starting in California. Right. Now you have crop pot fields that are not going to be worth what they were before. So what can we populate these fields with? Heroin.
Right.
Light brown Mexican heroin grown on fields that have been leached of nutrients, decades of growing marijuana and whatever else they were growing out there. Heroin was also been growing out there for a while, but not in this volume. They see a hole in the market, so they start putting fentanyl to infuse this heroin that is very not as potent as some of the stuff that came before it, and they started pumping that into the United States as the prescription opiate epidemic is stopped in a way.
Right.
And they're like, "Oh, you don't have any prescription? Well, here's all this heroin." It's almost like a planned thing, It's almost like an asymmetric warfare operation that is taking a generation to take place. It was an interesting phenomenon to see this transfer.
Yeah, just as I remember, because as the prescription, Oxycontins were just getting crunched on it. That's when you saw in law enforcement, you just saw this rise in heroin, and it was great. And fentanyl was just all over the place.
It was almost like they were waiting to unveil this new thing, And I think I started speaking publicly about some of this 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I think on one of the major interviews that I had, I talked about the fact that what is coming next is bogus medication, basically laced with fentanyl, or fentanyl pills made to be look like legitimate pain pills in package and everything that would fool some people. And I said that as what's next, and now this is what there is, medication pain medication being given out there that isn't pain medication. It's basically pill presses being utilized to crank out millions of pills that you would fool somebody in a nightclub, or you would fool somebody in a dark corner somewhere. It's like, hey, this is a pain medication. Here you go. Yeah, 2 days. That you won't survive the night in some of these cases because there's no way to know exactly how much fentanyl was put in there.
Yeah, you hear every so often of the some version of a celebrity or something using tainted drugs. There's basically fentanyl in there. They end up killing themselves, but then it gets washed away. It just doesn't, it doesn't seem to have the effect.
I don't know what Tom Petty was given.
Yeah,
but I have a very big suspicion, from what I know and what I've heard, that it was probably one of those laced those fake pain medications that he was given. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Could be. But yeah, you're seeing it in everything. You're being infused in everything. Cocaine.
Yeah. Fentanyl. You saw those comedians, those 4 comedians. 3 of them were killed. Just doing that. I remember I just listening to guys like Rogan talking about that they go out, they think it's coke, and 3 of them end up dead, right away. We see it all the time. Like here in Vegas, we see fentanyl is just a real problem, and the number of deaths that's attributed to fentanyl, and yet there seems to be no real action. But that's another interesting thing. So the problem, like the thing that we're Americans, of course, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, we'll just go down there and we'll shut everything down and we'll do that. Well, I had round 1 of that when I was in the military. I was in SNOCAP, and I saw how we handled it in Colombia, and it was ridiculous. I mean, there was something going on down there during that time, meaning it would have been so easy to do that, and yet what would happen is you'd be concentrating on one group, and you weren't allowed to look at this other group. It was going on the whole time. And you're asking your questions because you're a knucklehead. You're a low level. I was a low level officer down there. Intel guy doing stuff. Well, we got this intel, and they'd ignore anything having to do with the other cartel. We want Medellin right now. We don't care about Cali. We don't. And so I saw that back then, and you realize somebody's pulling strings. There's something. Yeah. There's something way beyond our pay grade that's going on here, and there's a need for this to continue. But what I thought was interesting, I heard recently that the cartel, I don't know if what the interview was, but they've already planned that if crackdown starts coming in, one of the tactics would just be to flood the market, flood our market with really tainted material that would do tremendous damage.
Yeah, this rumor exploded. It's circles. This is. Mexico runs on WhatsApp. So I not only worked in Mexico as a police officer, but I also did a lot of instructing down there. So I have active agents all over the country that have some pretty gnarly. They hear gnarly shit and then send me gnarly shit. And I remember among some of the things that I was sent was during the threats by the past administration to make the terrorist to declare cartels terrorist organizations, and how they were going to pressure the government to cut it out basically, and the laughing threat that you would hear was, well, we'll start poisoning random drug loads that go across the border. to just make the most of the United States go into withdrawals and see the health crisis that that's going to create for you, and then see if the pressure is going to remain on these organizations down south. Now, if that's not if that's not a clear threat, I don't know what is. And it is an interesting one. And also the concept that a lot of Americans have that these organizations are really far away. The higher you build that wall, you won't get touched. You're safe.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, scenario, and people can envision. I form an abduction group, and I dress everybody up as federal police officers. And we do a raid on your house and drag you out by your fucking hair as your kids and wife is screaming, and tell them to be calm. We're here to conduct official government business. And then your husband ends up tortured and dead horribly somewhere in a clandestine grave. Now, most people would imagine that happened to somebody in Mexico, but that's something that happened almost a decade ago in San Diego. People could want to look up Los Palillos gang and what they were capable of doing back then in the United States. Basically, they dressed up as ICE agents, did mock raids, and would drag people down to Mexico across the border. Now, this whole concept of we don't want that violence here, while you're burying thousands of your youth through things like fentanyl overdoses and whatever. And also, in another regard, some of these cartel groups are growing in power within the country, within the United States. I mean, illegal pot grows all over California run by cartels.
Yeah.
So this whole concept and notion of the United States, a lot of Americans have of this being a foreign problem, that we don't want them here, is laughable in a lot of regards, as far as the perceptions that a lot of Mexicans have, and a lot of people that have lived on both sides of the border that get asked that question. When are they coming here? Like, when do you expect to see certain activity? I mean, I've been seeing them in the United States for decades now.
It's right under your nose. I mean, I remember Phoenix. Phoenix just had it was amazing when you started looking beneath things in Phoenix, what you saw. And that's just one city. That's just one city in the U.S., but that one got a lot of coverage.
Yeah, I mean, Arizona is the abduction capital of the United States.
Yeah.
Phoenix specifically. You don't hear that a lot, but that's what it is. You don't hear a lot about revenge killings, about people being dragged to Mexico by cartel forces, or illegal pot grows operated by cartels all over Southern California in public lands. This is the influence, and some of the things that are doing in the open now are pretty ridiculous. And again, we're living through a period in the United States where recruitment is down, and every single police academy that I've had to go and train people out of, standards are lowered, and nobody wants to be a cop anymore. It's a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm.
No, it's amazing here in Vegas. It's the one thing they need. I remember early 2000s that the waiting list was forever to get on. And now you could literally walk on right now. And the only reason Vegas is actually doing okay is because all these other cities like Minneapolis and places where all these cops don't want to be cops, they're coming to Vegas because they're not subjected to a politician running. Vegas is one of those unique places. I think it's the only place in the country where the sheriff is elected, and he's like the second most powerful person in the state. But it's autonomously. He makes the decisions. The governor doesn't tell him what to do, or there's no politician. So we're a little bit lucky that way, where we'll probably do it. But even we're having trouble, recruiting people. And so it's like you said, it's almost like if it was a movie script, you'd say, you can't say that. That's nobody ever believed that, but it's all happening. It's like this perfect thing. Going back to the new generation cartel, what opened up the door for them? Or were they somebody that were building all along, and they were able to
I
to
mean,
just take advantage of the vacuum?
I think the perfect alignment for them was that they were based out of the West Coast in Mexico, basically giving them access and control over some pretty important ports.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
Specific that anybody that holds control over a major Mexican port like the port in Colima in Manzanillo, I mean, you're basically sitting on a doorway, a back door. Think of the United States being a house, and that port in the third world being a little mouse hole where you can get shit through. Um, you know, the corruption is rife in all of Mexican ports, and so they're all run by the Mexican Marina, the Marines. Basically, the Mexican Marines are the ones, or the Navy. Mexican Navy is the one that runs all of these ports, and all these ports are pumping all of what they're pumping into Mexico and up into the United States. So another interesting aspect of the growth that some of the specific group had was it was originated as a count. It was originated by the Sinaloa cartel as a counter Zeta team. I mean, this was a hunter-killer group. They used to call them los matacetas. Basically, a big part of what they originally were was a hit team, like a professional hit team. They would go somewhere and they would root out all these guys, and they wouldn't leave anything alive.
The Zetas, and they had military training, didn't they? So at least some of the founders of the Zetas.
I mean, the Zetas were the original Zetas were member of the GAFES. People shouldn't confuse the GAFES with the current special forces, Army Special Forces in Mexico. They're completely different animals. The GAFES were the old school group. I mean, highly educated, language trained, explosives, Fort Bragg, alumni, School of the Americas. I mean, these
School
guys,
of the Americas, man, it's produced so. In Venezuela, I did a lot of work in Venezuela, and I saw what the School of the Americas did. It was amazing.
These individuals are that type of that's who they were. They were smart enough to not only get out of working for the government and earning more as bodyguards and then later on as their own cartel, but they would be very good about recruiting and training more people to augment their forces. I mean, like in any true special forces unit, you would send them to another country, train the locals, augment their forces. This is what they were good at. And as a response to that, they basically formed a version of that, and they called them matacetas, basically Zeta killers. This was their origin point, and this kind of tells you a lot about how they've grown and how they operate. There's rumors of American SF, former SF individuals working in central Mexico in some of the training camps these guys have. And you can see traces of it, I think, probably in, the way they set up their gear on their plates, or the adages that you're seeing of them utilizing IED technology and IED capabilities in very much a Middle Eastern way, where they set up these coordinated attacks with them. I think the main thing that I've seen as a pushing force as far as these aren't the classic hats and pointy boots and wearing silk shirts with chains on them. I mean, these guys some of their top guys are, trained. I used to work with many people that are not working where I used to work anymore. And some of these guys spent a few cycles in Coronado training with NSW. Yeah. Some of these guys did the border SAR course with the Border Patrol, learning not only desert survival, but also a few things that they might have been well off not showing us, Right. And also the operational experience that all these guys have, this is who they recruit. They're very good about recruiting ex-military, ex-police, and if they find anybody with a specialty, they'll recruit him too. And one of the first things you see that some of these the cells do is basically you'll have one specialist, and one specialist will turn two other people into what they do, what they know how to do. and now you have a group of people who are specialized in whatever, you know. There's a currently, I've heard, this is just, you know, hearsay from some people down there, that there's a group of specialists within the new generation cartel that specifically focus on IED technology. And they're the Mexican Army's sole advantage against some of these organizations, especially specifically in some of the rural parts of Mexico, is air superiority and fast armor in the form of Sandcats and, you know, a few other vehicles that the Army has. So these are two things that will give them superiority over some of these cartel forces. So cartel forces have figured out how to create anti-aircraft capabilities to themselves. The new generation cartel is the only one of the only groups in Mexico that has taken down military and federal police aircraft. Wow. And now they're also setting up roadside IEDs, you know, projected roadside IEDs, and very much a, you know, Iraq war type setting, and or just landing 40 millimeter grenades from the sky with a drone, or they're utilizing pesticide chemical mixtures to create their own chemical forms of chemical explosives, basically turning them into a gas dispersal device and dropping those on some of these on the armor or the entrenched positions that the government is having. So the reason why you're seeing the sophistication with that specific group, I think, and why they're different and why they're, you know, moving in a very militarized way. And I think again, it's that their motives, their motivation, and how some of the ways they recruit and augment their forces is very militarized, very militaristic. And when its original leader, so Mencho, Nemesio Ceguera Cervantes, was a former police officer, so even he had some experience when it came to this. So a lot of the ways they operate are very much military, paramilitary in nature.
Yeah, it's interesting to see also the innovation. You know, I kind of want to switch a little bit now into the level of violence and the comfort, the cultural comfort that I don't know if that's the right way to put it, that they have, but even the innovative, like you talked about, you know, armored vehicles, the improvised armor that I've seen them create. You know, you shared a lot of that material of just, you know, what they're able to do. It's really, I'm really, it's funny when you talk to some of the guys in the community and they talk about any interactions they've had with you or anything, the thing that they walk away from is not, you know, something super sophisticated. It's usually the low tech, high concept way they use things, like how they, you know, how they employ kids to get passwords, and how they do just, it's all very, and some of the stuff that you're able to show, you know, how to get into locks and stuff like that. It's not like, we're so used to like the high end super, you know, the super expensive equipment and everything. And you're able to show ways of defeating things to people that you learn from street kids and cartel kids, and that it's really innovative. It's amazing. Yeah. But could you talk to that? And could you also talk to the history? Why is the cartel community so comfortable with such an incredible level of violence that they're able to keep doing? Like I said, as you pointed out, they were the emphasis for ISIS. ISIS actually learned a lot from them. Where does that come from? The history of Mexico in some way, shape, or form?
I mean,
I think it'd be interesting.
I'm you know, Mexican. My family's from Guadalajara. Their family's from Michoacan and Tlaxcala. Mexico is very diverse, just like the United States. I think Iowa, Alaska, and Hawaii are the only ones that I need to, only parts of the United States that I need to visit. And now I have a complete map as far as, like, I've seen most of the United States. And just like you go from LA to Tennessee, you know, you go to somewhere in those mountains where you see some of the moonshine stills. It seems like a different country, you know. Seems like a different country. But Mexico, I think Mexico has an interesting history, very different than the United States. People need to realize that Mexico was conquered by a country that was coming out of their own conquest. The Spanish were just got rid of the Moors before they made their trip across the ocean. So it's a conquered nation conquering another nation. A lot of the stuff that happened in Mexico, you know, a lot of people talk about genocide.
Sorry, lost your audio. Hey Ed, you muted yourself. It looks like. Yeah, now I can hear you. So you just said before you muted, can you hear me?
I'm having trouble with my headphones for some reason. Hold on.
Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah, you were right before you cut out. You were talking about the history of Mexico. It's all different areas that he came from. But you're saying the Spanish, they were a conquered nation conquering a nation during that time, and just that's where a lot of the original.
Yeah, so Spain is a conquered nation. Come over to Mexico. Come over to what was what was going to turn into Mexico, and what they find is a vast empire conquering other smaller empires around it, and basically being the big dog. So they allied themselves with the enemies of that nation and took it down. A lot of people died of disease, and a lot of them were marrying the locals. Spanish have a tendency to mingle. So we have that generational trauma as a country all the way back then, as far as a group of natives allying themselves with a foreign enemy to take down. Some Mexicans want to romanticize the Mexica or the Aztec Empire. Right. They were very sophisticated. They lived very well because they conquested a lot, just like most nations. But we have this trauma, this generational trauma with us. The brutality that some of these nations use to subjugate others, neighboring nations, from the human sacrifices element that you can kind of still see traces of in some of these cartel execution videos when people's hearts are being cut out of their chests as they're still breathing. I think there has to be some relationship between that and what's happening now with some of the just ability of some of these people to do some heinous things to another human being. I think there's a circle of violence that gets generated in a lot of these events. Classic example of this would be Güero Palma, a cartel member of the Sinaloa cartel, friend of El Chapo Guzman, whose family was murdered horribly, or abducted and murdered horribly, but thrown off a bridge. Now, you could imagine rules were in place at some point, and even with some of these criminal organizations, where you wouldn't mess with family, or women and kids were off the table. But a lot of these rules died with the originators of a lot of these cartel organizations in the past. There was a time when some of these people were, following at least some basic forms of rules and modalities, but all of that is gone now. We're stuck in a cycle of vengeance and violence. You kill one of ours, we'll kill 4 of yours. Right. We'll kill 4 of yours, and we'll kill not only 8 of yours, but we'll figure out where their families live. And you're going to see a video of a whole fucking bloodline being eliminated, set on fire in a field somewhere. Why are we seeing these levels of violence in Mexico? I think number one, Mexico, the government of Mexico is a failed state. Completely failed state. The political class failed. The true power behind the throne in Mexico is the army, the military industrial. There's actually a military industrial complex in Mexico, and that is who's behind the government. Um, they were taken out of their barracks and put into a policing role by the president, Felipe Calderon, the president that I worked under. And we have the open warfare situation that we have now because of it. And they don't want to go back into their barracks. They have contracts to build airports and train lines. All of these are military contracts. The federal police used to be a civilian arm. Now it's a military arm. So they're not going to let control of power. And Army generals and individuals that have gone to or worked with cartels have long history. So I'm not going to talk about that specific part of it, but you can see that it's a complicated situation where most Americans don't know that they themselves are paying for a lot of the guns, rifles, uniforms, trucks, helicopters they see on TV. When you see, for example, the people that are moving around the Chapo Guzman when he was arrested, or the raid that was done to capture him. Right? Most people think that the Mexican Marines captured El Chapo Guzman. It was two federal federal road police that captured him. He was speeding away from the environment. They stopped him in a Jetta. They were in negotiations to let him go, and two Marine helicopters showed up and took him into custody.
Interesting.
But they don't like that. That doesn't look good on Netflix, and also it makes them look bad. But you have this military force, uniformed, training, just like me, I was trained in the United States. You have all these people, it all gets paid by American tax dollars. The United States has been outsourcing the drug war as far as equipping, training, and paying people to do it for them in Mexico for years, decades. Plan Merida, basically it's a binational agreement to try and figure out cartel counter narcotics operations in Mexico. So all Americans have a vested interest in saying something about it. It's something that people doesn't cross a lot of people's minds, but it's not our fight. I hear a lot of Americans say, or every now and then, oh, it's their situation. We shouldn't get involved, isn't it? But you are involved,
But we'll send 40 billion over to Ukraine.
Send 40 billion over to the Ukraine and send a bunch of those Stinger missiles that are now showing up in dark web marketplaces. And I'm sure they're going to show up here in Mexico in the next few years. A lot of stuff that was let go of in Afghanistan, including some of those very high quality nods, are showing up in Mexico now.
Oh, yeah. So, well, there's a whole there's rumors that there are cartel buyers over in Poland right now. Because that's where that's where a lot of the equipment's amassing. When you sit there, and it's just sitting there a lot of times, and God knows where it's going.
I've never seen any evidence of a Stinger missile or something of that nature, like in Mexico, like a modern anti-aircraft capable device, other than man pads. Yep. And a few miniguns out there that I've seen evidence of being used. But now we're heading into a place where a lot of Americans feel safe that their flight from coming into San Diego won't be taken out of the sky.
Yeah.
Because we're in the United States, the Army, everybody's protecting us. Except, I could stand from a pretty good vantage point in Tijuana, where nobody gives a fuck about anything, and take out whatever I have, put it on my shoulder, fire it away. Now, the threats that are coming, I think, people sometimes ask me, like, what's next? What's coming? What's over the horizon? Mexico right now is going through gestation. It's a cocoon, basically. I think some of these cartel forces are going through this period where they're cocoons. They had to make do with what they had or what they could get or improvise. They had to, improvise a lot of the explosives that you use with mining explosives, plastic explosive used in the mining industry.
Right.
They learned a lot of their trade crafts from Americans coming from the conflicts overseas, and also from IRA people that went down to train the FARC Colombian guerrillas, and some of the training and know-how and skill sets are now have now made their way into parts of Mexico. So we're seeing a lot of IEDs and a lot of playing around with homemade mortars, explosives of that nature, just a bunch of weird stuff. Also, currently, I think we're seeing a trend of urban precision shooting or sniping, very much in the flavor of the IRA attacks that they would have on government forces. I think the change you're seeing now, or the period you're seeing, is basically they're trying to figure out tactics, but they hadn't figured out supply. Now you're seeing that they're figuring out supply, because now they have, it used to be you would see a cartel guy with a homemade plate carrier with some AK magazines, maybe 2 AK magazines welded together, then you switch from Fast and the Furious generation. Now they have P90s and, cop killer guns and AR-15s that have EOTechs on them and stuff like that. And now you're seeing they're actually shopping for what they want. Now you're seeing groups of people that all of them have generic optics on their guns that are probably sourced from somewhere in Asia, but they're still optics and they're still uniform. They don't really care at the same time. Their ability to communicate in between each other, and also their ability to have disruptors for communications. They order those now, and they have them, and they bring them here. Anti-aircraft technology. There's a reason why there was no helicopters flying over Sinaloa when El Chapo Guzman's son was arrested. It's because there's a no-fly zone over Culiacan, right? But I think what you're seeing now is their ability to get what they need, from overseas.
I mean, just for a second, Americans have to realize that would be like we're here in Las Vegas, and there's a criminal son that we've located for a criminal gang here, and they are afraid to fly any sort of a helicopter because the organization has the ability to shoot those down. That's how powerful the situation. Meaning, not even our military will come in.
Yeah,
because of their. I just want people to grasp that. That's what's going on down there.
And also, this is the interesting part of it. So you see sophistication, conventional weaponry, and then they're starting to get a mastery over that. And on the other end, they have a very sophisticated network of unconventional. I've trained some special operations group in the United States, a few of them. I've been asked a few things from certain groups to, like, how would this happen? How do they do that? I'll give you an example that actually happened pretty recently. Tijuana is a pretty interesting city. I was born there. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to me. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's my hometown. I love it.
Tijuana is great.
There was a series of attacks in Tijuana, or they call them attacks, basically. Cars were put in the middle of the road and set on fire all over Tijuana, very strategic points, basically putting Tijuana as a standstill. They paid a bunch of kids to grab gasoline, pour it into taxis, put them across the road and burn them, right? These attacks happened in a very specific time of day when people are getting off work. And Tijuana is on the border, so a lot of people from the United States that live in San Diego, that can't afford to live in San Diego, live in Tijuana. Tijuana is being jokingly called San Diego South now, Mm-hmm. Marijuana trafficking happens from California into Tijuana now. It's the other way around. So it's a bastion of economic growth that is insane right now. That's why there's all these luxury apartment buildings coming up all over Tijuana. So it's the federal government in Mexico knows this, that it is it's a source of money and interest. So the new generation cartel that operates in Tijuana started getting pressured by the government specifically, and they wouldn't pressure the Sinaloa cartel, they started pressuring them. So they said, well, let's do a show of force. I don't know. If I had a mind and a budget for all the cars that were burned and the people that participated in there, I don't think they wasted more than $1,000 and put the city on its knees, causing
Wow.
losses in the millions. You know,
Wow.
causing losses in the millions. They arrested all of them. So what? There's just random kids that were paid by a brain that wanted to remain detached from this attack, and nobody knows the true mastermind or responsible individual. Um, I was asked by by some of these people that are think tank people and some of these people that basically train foreign forces to how to do some of these things against a repressive regime or something like that. I said, Ed, how would you, how would you kind of figure this out? Well, I don't need to ask that question. These guys have figured it out for me. Get a bunch of these guys and they'll make balls of kitty litter that they'll stuff into nozzles of gas at gas stations all over the town. And now you have not only people not wanting to fill up on gas because of worries of fucking up their cars, but you have cars lying idle in the road now. So now that's traffic. You'll have a viral video of somebody injecting tainted blood of some sort into random water balls at the store. And now you have a fucking crisis and nobody wants fucking water. And you do these things layered and paired. And this is how they work. This is how they fuck over a government, basically, that has the ability to helicopters, guns, men, training, all this just gets turned into nothing by somebody with that, and also the ability to pay for their creation. So I think we're coming to a point where you're going to close the circle between this weird school of unconventional warfare, where they have learned to master not only the hearts and minds principle that the United States was trying to do in Iraq. These guys have won that day and where they operate mostly. You're coming to a point where the unconventional and the conventional, now the conventional is accessible to them, and now that's gonna turn into a whole thing. And also, there are less large cartel organizations now, and we're almost at the point in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe, where there's going to be a single giant cartel all over Mexico, which is the new generation cartel, which is the one I'm banking on. It's going to be probably the dominant one coming up on top at the end. And when that happens, they don't have to worry about others. So who they worry about then? Hold, control, maintain. This is what's coming.
This is how you're telling me all this, and I'm just laughing to myself at the number of Americans, Canadians, people running down to go live in Mexico, because it's such a great thing. They're telling me how great it is. And it is. Mexico is fantastic, but it's funny. They're oblivious to this part of it, just what they're doing.
It's an interesting phenomenon. So people going down to Tulum to live, all these COVID refugees going down to Tulum to live.
Right.
And also all of a sudden it turns into a violent town. Tulum historically wasn't violent. There weren't public executions of people in these hotels, these luxury places. And the reason why that is all of a sudden the American drug market that they were trying to traffic to is now right there.
Yeah.
So obviously with that, the violence is going to come. And again, I'm not saying that all Americans coming down to live in Mexico are drug addicts.
Right.
But there's a reason why violence exploded when all of these COVID refugees came down to live in Tulum during that period. And again, Tijuana is another example of this, where you see this giant population of Americans coming down to live in a country in Mexico, and with them they bring some of them might bring their drug habits.
Their habits, yeah, of course.
So a lot of the violence you see in Tijuana is related to the assassination of sales people on street corners. They kill one and they'll kill yours, but they're fighting over the local drug market. The war in Tijuana isn't about trafficking drugs to the United States, it's about holding control over the local drug market. Wow. And ergo being able to then use this the city of Tijuana as a way to cross drugs into the United States, you know. But again, the perception is the perception that Americans have, and when I say Americans, like I've spoken to Senate committees on some of these issues. You'd be surprised at how high of a level ignorance exists when it comes to some of the issues and problems that are happening on the border.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, that's a really good encapsulation of this. Can we switch over to another thing? I heard you on Sean Ryan's show talking about the operation tempo that the unit you were in. I believe he calculated out you were going 7 years straight. You guys were basically every day, and he calculated the missions. I believe it was right. It was over, I think, 2002. I'm sorry, 2,200 operations, if not more. You know,
I never even put myself to pen to paper to try and figure out all the stuff. You know, like basically you graduate and you can't go on vacation the first 2 years.
That's amazing.
It's because they don't give a fuck. You know, so you can't go on vacation. You go out and you're embedded with the military because at this time when I started, the military didn't have the foundations of anything related to counter cartel operations. I mean, they would go and do hunter-killer type stuff, but not arresting investigations and stuff like that. So when I started, that's what they did with us. They embedded us with the military, and we would work with them and other agencies to try and figure things out. And it was every day. I remember the first time I went into this house that I had a G3 H&K G3 rifle, and I had a second chance vest on, soft armor.
Wow.
And I went into this place, and it's covered in guns. A room that we went into was just covered in just an armory, plates, helmets, magazines. And I looked around like, holy shit. And then I looked behind. One of the Army guys that was with me was
just grabbing, loading up.
Yeah, he's like, those who sin together smile together. And I looked at him. What does that mean? He said, grab a fucking plate carrier, you idiot. So just put a plate carrier on. The normal in Mexico is very abnormal in other parts of the world, apparently. It was day and night, radio, phone on, leave wherever you were to run to do things, basically living, eating, and sleeping with the people that you're working with. They would have us sleeping in military barracks. They would have us sleeping in hotels and houses they would rent. We would be dispersed out there and then concentrate back to see what we found. It was a pretty stressful time in my life.
Yeah, well, and we talk about the toll that takes on you. Like at the time, you're so in it that you don't have time to even process. So I probably, you're doing the typical. Just if you get some time off, you probably just drinking and just doing whatever to just sedate yourself.
Alcohol was the main medication we had. That's it.
And what I'm seeing, because I see it, in the U.S. community, military community of guys coming back and stuff like that. But that op tempo you guys had was absolutely insane. And we don't have a great system, but at least we have some stuff in place for our people to get some sort of help, and we're getting better at it right now. But what's amazing is that wasn't even discussed down with what you guys saw. And I'm just wondering, like I noticed in some of your posts and stuff, you are being very open about processing this now and trying to go through that. What are you finding? Like, were a lot of the guys that you worked with, did this have major effects on them later on?
Yeah, I mean, so number one, any sort of mental issue of any kind was hidden. You wouldn't talk about any of this stuff. It was a surefire way of getting kicked out.
Right.
Talking about any of it, or just being loco or loquito, like that guy's crazy, or that guy's, there's something squirrely with him, or no quedó bien is something you would hear a lot. No quedó bien. He didn't turn out okay after what happened. So all of these words and stuff like that were in the environment, and you would see the repercussions of somebody talking about the fact that, hey, what I just did over there, and that freaked me the fuck out, and I don't want to be here. Can I just go somewhere? What do you mean you want to go somewhere? You're working. You can't go anywhere. So I just need to talk to somebody about, oh, you're crazy? Are you breaking? You're fucking breaking, aren't you? You're fucking breaking. No, I'm not. Oh, chill out. We're gonna fucking go drinking after this. So chill out, right? That was the deal.
Yeah.
Another aspect of it that people don't realize. This is not going to Fallujah. This is not going to Afghanistan and then coming back. This is it. These people.
That's where you live. This is. Yeah, that's what people don't get. It's like you guys, you live there. You never got a break or anything. It was.
You're on. You go to the tacos after your work. They're not going to say, "Oh, this guy's out of play." Right. The job itself is very much not well viewed by a large segment of the population. So you're not only having to hide yourself from the enemy, whoever they may be, because they could also be internal, because it was not, we didn't trust some of the people in our own office, much less people out there. So you not only had to face the scrutiny of the people that might, people around you, as far as the populace, that would spit on you and do horrible shit to you if you found out what you did for a living. But you also have to worry about the people behind you working with you, and also the people in front of you that you have to go after. So paranoia was the key. We talk about being on red constantly, condition red constantly. That was part of the whole reality of living down there and working down there. And basically, the lack of a pause button is what I now kind of call. I now kind of call it. Talking to some of my veteran friends in the U.S. and seeing how they talked about coming back from a deployment, and I'm like, you lost me with the word coming back.
Yeah.
That aspect of it, I think, has it's an aspect of that life for some people, and specifically some people that I work with. There was many suicides in the group that I was,
right.
And a lot of these were motivated by not only the inability to process some of the things that they went through, but mostly because of the inability for them to absorb and or conform to their family lives or their family situations. That's, of course, because
I can't imagine not having to do that. Like, literally, bad enough for these guys that are overseas and they have to come back and they have to try to reintegrate, but you had to do it while you're doing the job. Same area, same thing. And then, I can't imagine coming home and like, hey, your son's having, a bad time at school with grades or something. You got to try to figure that, I don't know how you can process the two,
Yeah. And then, they would reach your families. There was at least 4 cases in my career of people that I worked with targeted with their families, with them, one of them was a kid in Ensenada, I think. I think he was in Ensenada. He was killed with his wife coming out. He was not working. He was going out, and he was executed with FM57 pistols. They shot him. They shot his wife, and his daughter lost an arm in the attack. Obviously, this produces a rage and vengeful shit in the group you're with, and this talk about going after these motherfuckers and all that just fucking enrage. Everybody's just blood rage. Fucking get them. Let's go get them, right? And then you spend like 2-3 days hunting these fuckers out there and catch up to them. But then you come back to this tragedy that was never processed,
right,
that was never talked about, that was never sorted out. You see this government monster of a head turned towards vengeance, And then when it turns back, there's this kid without an arm and nobody to support this kid. And also, she was born out of wedlock, so she doesn't qualify for some of the aspects of the insurance. The beneficiary just died in front of her, which is her mom. And now we have to figure out how to maintain this kid, you know? And the guns that were used came from Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
So now
As soon as you said them, I go, they had to be Fast and Furious.
So now you have this weird process where you're looking at some of the people that we would liaison with in the United States, and now we're looking at them with like shit, you know.
Who can you trust?
Paranoia. Paranoia was a baseline for that whole time for everybody there. You would have people that would pass confidence exams, you know, people that had an FBI background check recently, all of a sudden turn out to be members of whatever organization, and they were compromised, and they gave out the phone numbers and emergency contact numbers of all the unit to whoever. It shows up in a printed thing somewhere in a safe house somewhere. So now everybody is not only working and worrying about operational security for ourselves, but now we're somewhere in the house wearing masks and everybody's calling their significant others to move overnight, you know, if they have somebody. And that if you ever had to tell your wife to take everything and leave a house, you know, that you've been building with the meager whatever you get from the government, it's a tough situation. Divorces obviously became a thing, and after divorces, usually suicides were a factor.
Of course.
So I mean, death was often. I mean, a lot of people think I'm fascinated with death, or that death has some sort of weird cool factor or shit like that. Death and the effigies of death and stuff like that were all around us, even when we were working, specifically because of that, because we're surrounded by it. You know, it was an everyday thing kind of for us.
Well, I mean,
I didn't hear the word PTSD.
You know, one of the things I think is so interesting about your background is, I mean, I was a military kid. I grew up on military bases. I wanted to be in the military. I wanted to do this. I went up. So I had a real understanding of something. Your history is so interesting. You're basically a skater kid in TJ, having a really kind of good life. You wanted to go to medical school, and then the economy changed, things changed, and then you answered a call for a random law enforcement situation, and you fell into this world. You obviously adopted and you did very well in it and everything, but it was not a calling for you originally. It wasn't something that you're there. So that's why I find your views on this so interesting, because this was not a world you sought out, in your life early on. This is something that you was kind of put upon you on a level. I equivocate what happened to you. It would be like if somebody just stumbled into almost a vetting process, and the next thing you're put in this special operations group right away, and you're handling some just horrific shit right out of the gate, and that's your world. I mean, you really were immersed in it, and your operation tempo and everything. So your views on this, I don't see you fascinated with it. I see you trying to explain to people, hey, this is a whole other, it's not what you think. But what I love about your approach is you don't glorify any of this stuff. It's a reality, and you try to warn people the cost of that reality.
Yeah, it's recently past weekend, I shared a room with a bunch of other instructors that come from their own backgrounds. We had Green Berets there. We had some very high level people there at this protector symposium. And my demeanor and my style and everything like that, for some people, where they were like, "Hey, Ed, you're like very different than these guys over here. Like, what? Like, what's why is that?" Well, culturally, I'm from a different part of the world. I fell into this. Look, when I saw that ad in the newspaper, I thought I was going to be doing community policing or something like that.
Right.
Like I envisioned myself, going over there and helping somebody with some shit that happened, or I don't know. You have this image in your head, and all of a sudden you're in this abandoned prison, because that was the academy they were trained us in, was an abandoned prison. And the people that are in charge of your training are all gafes, basically the guys that later turn into the Zetas. And you realize that you're there to do a different type of job. Um, I had to go out of that situation as, I shot I shot 20 rounds out of a Beretta 92 FS pistol, 10 rounds out of a shotgun, made 20 rounds out of an AR. And as soon as I got out, I got a Glock and a fucking G3 rifle, right? So I had to basically learn on the fly. The people that I was working with were highly SF guys from the Army, some people from the federal forces. But it was basically, as I was going, looking at people's gears, like, oh shit, I need to adjust this. I need to adjust that. I need to go port up here, port down there. I need to probably invest in a light. These people are moving in a very weird way. I need to adapt to that. So basically, I have to learn on the fly as I was going. And towards the end of the whole experience, I realized that the the motivations that a lot of Americans have to join police organization or to join the military or whatever. I was spit on when people would find out that I worked as a cop. Lost a few girlfriends when they realized that that was my, my background.
Right.
There was no homecoming, fucking whatever. It is still a vilified thing. Every now and then, when I post something about my past, I get a lot of horrible comments about, all cops in Mexico are corrupt and everything like that, even though I never took a dime. But it doesn't matter, because that's the perception. So who would want to fucking go into that line of work,
Yeah.
into that field, every now and then I get that question, like, hey, like, if you had, what would you tell to somebody that was like, when you started, like, what would you tell them to join and go? Like, don't,
Yeah.
don't join. Cautionary tale. I'm not divorced from Mexico as a country, but the government down there is very corrupt, and some of the institutions down there as well. The whole aspect of it being a romantic war where there's sides, where there's bad guys and good guys, where there's a victory, a clear victory for any side. There's no such thing now. It's just a cycle. Having a conversation with some of the guys that are still down there working, they told me the names of the top guys now. I don't recognize any of them, you know? So the top guys that they're going after now are probably, I don't know, 3 generations removed from some of the people that I had to fight. Young guys, 18, 26, and the 26-year-old is in charge of like 260 people, but somewhere in one organization somewhere. And you see them like, hey, like, what do you think, Ed? It's like, fuck, man. What advice do you have? Leave. Leave now while you still have the use of your appendages, I guess, while you're still free,
Yeah.
It's definitely not a war to be glorified, and or a war to be that produces a lot of positive things, basically, is what I'm saying. It is very much a unnamed, thankless, thoughtless war that is raging on them, that is producing some pretty scary things.
For your personal mental health, have you found any particular processes or therapies that were useful to you? I've heard you talk about a couple of things. I think, a lot of people obviously go down south to do psychedelics and the ayahuasca and all that kind of stuff. And I know some of the guys in our community, I know they've really benefited from some of that. But what's your thought process on any of that kind of stuff?
Well, I think that's at the end of a long road spectrum. I mean, I grew up with psychedelics as a cultural thing. I grew up around
Right.
some of the Kumeyaay Indians in Baja, and And growing up, I mean, they were, they would in cookie boxes and stuff like that. They would be passed around. Fucking, we'd play in a punk band, and that was a thing. Uh, but they were like a novelty back then. Um, During my career, I was taught that alcohol is a medication, specifically. And growing up Mexican, this is tequila bottles and mezcal bottles are a thing.
Yeah.
And a few of you out there that might be listening to this that had trained with me before I stopped drinking will attest to the fact that I was a drinker. I could drink a few people under the table when it came down to tequila and mezcal. Um, I learned about PTSD. I learned about trauma. I learned about putting words to things that I didn't have words for in a place called Fallbrook, California. When I left the job, a beautiful couple took me in. When I say took me in, basically they sponsored me to do my immigration process. To people that I will be indebted to for the rest of my life, and also my family. Dan Stanchfield, he's a Naval Special Warfare reservist right now, and Kelly, his wife, both amazing Americans and amazing people. They're the first ones that kind of sat down with me and started noticing certain aspects of my behavior and certain things that would happen to me during certain situations that would say, hey, and that's not normal, or hey, that seems like there's an issue happening, or that you have an issue. So I started being in the Fallbrook area. There was a bunch of Marines because of Pendleton, and then going into a training community, I started meeting other people that are veterans, and slowly but surely, I started getting more words, more history about what I had or what my situation it was. I was self-medicating to a high degree at this point. 3 cans of Foster's oil cans to fall asleep was where I was at, basically. I was drinking myself to sleep most nights. And going through therapy, realizing the aspects of some of the things that I've gone through and how they weren't normal, they weren't processed. I basically put a pause button with alcohol on all my shit for 12 years. How that alcohol needed to go. So I think, before every now and then I get asked about hallucinogenics or some of the aspects of therapeutical aspects of that. I always talk about the sobriety part of it first. I had to stop drinking. Alcohol is one of the only drugs, if not one of the only drugs that will kill you if you leave it. Not even heroin does that.
Right.
I had to isolate myself. I had to do a bunch of shit. I did it old school, cold turkey.
Right.
And it almost killed me. But I remember the clarity after probably 2 months that I left it. And just, I was equated to basically going about your life at your house with the blindfold on and then taking that blindfold off and seeing the state of your house. That's how it felt when I stopped drinking, because
Right.
now I couldn't hide my bullshit, I started seeing some of the damage it did to my marriage, which ended. I started seeing some of the unresolved issues with not only trauma, but also processing that trauma, and also the being stuck in survival mode basically for that long of a period, and what that does to your brain, your body. And finally coming to terms with the fact that that is not my normal anymore. And it's not going to be my normal anymore. And there's a weird pain and a weird processing, like a grief that happens. And I think most American service personnel that are coming back from a deployment or they're coming into civilian life will know about what I'm speaking of. When you realize that everything you were doing on a daily basis to not only keep yourself safe, but your people around you alive, all the equipment that was put into your care, all of the importance of the life and death importance of everything you do means absolutely nothing when you come back and you put on a pair of bands and the only the only launcher you have is a dart launcher for fucking throwing darts in the backyard with your kids. You know,
Yeah.
the only thing you have to worry about is, set the alarm up early so you can go to the farmer's market and not miss the cool bender that you like. Um, the aspects of being able to realize that all of these things that are happening now have nothing to do with what was happening then. And there's a tendency for us that are kind of stuck in the whole survival mentality to infuse both now and then every time we get a chance. Um, I think for me, at the first interview I did with Sean Ryan, I was still drinking. Um, I was about to make that leap and stop drinking. Uh, and you can see some of the inflammation in me. Um, when I started actually focusing on getting better and figuring out medication for myself, obviously the United States has a lot of options of medication, and a lot of them are not okay, or a lot
Yeah.
of them are misprescribed. And I'm not a medical professional, but when I went through the process of trying to look for help in that regard, I not only had the advantage of having a lot of people around me that had already gone through that process that warned me not to, but also, a good doctor that kind of orientated me more into how I should go about this. So when people ask me about hallucinogenics, I know I just rambled on a lot about alcohol and stuff like that, but specifically, there's a Terence McKenna quote about being aware of unearned wisdom. And he's talking about hallucinogenics, I think. And I think if people are looking for a magic bullet or a magic pill that you take to make you feel okay in the form of shrooms or whatever hallucinogenic process, therapeutic process, you can get ayahuasca, um, ketamine, whatever it is. Uh, you have to clear out your slate first, and you have to figure out some things out first when it comes to like all of the issues that you have to deal with first. And in a big regard, they amputated a lot of that shit from me with alcohol, eating better, exercising, building my body up again. Um, therapy, therapy is so fucking powerful and it's such a gift. Even though it was ridiculed and demonized and ostracized, and I was made to be ashamed about going through therapy from my upbringing and also from the work that I did and the people that I was working with and some of the people that were in charge of me. But once you start talking about things, man, it's like unloading. It's like letting go of things. And also, um, I am a very big supporter of group therapy, because if you've ever been too stuck in your own nonsense and feeling sorry for yourself, man, just being able to listen to somebody else's bullshit and how they're fucking going through some shit is
Yeah.
very humbling and also very centering. I have this quick story. There was a guy that would sit next to me in therapy circle constantly. They're friends with bullshit about stuff now. Salty as shit. Broken, man. His body was pretty apparently very broken. Didn't know a lot about his story. All of us would share our stories during our sessions until it came down to him. I stood up and shared my story, and everybody was like, "Wow, it's an interesting story," And a few of them probably went to that in the parking lot, looked me up and shit like that. So it was like coming out for me, People were like, "Oh shit, you're known and your story is interesting."
Right.
The guy that was sitting next to me that we would bullshit together didn't want to talk to me afterwards. There was some distance there, and I couldn't tell what that was, and I felt like shit about it. I talked to him in the parking lot later, like, "Hey, dude, did I do something? Did I say something?" In my mind, I was going like I felt judged by this guy who was suddenly quiet because of me and my story. No, he didn't do anything wrong. You know, he shared his story. He was a rodeo man. I started off riding and then went into rodeo clowning and then drugs, pain medication, divorces, and a bunch of other shit that comes with that, and also a broken ass body.
Right.
At 38, he couldn't bend one of his knees. He couldn't move one of his hands. He was bad. The reason he told me later that he couldn't even talk to me anymore was that you seem to have done so much with your trauma. And all the shit that I went through and all the stuff that I had to do with my body and all the things that I lost with everything that I did. And I am a car mechanic and I haven't done anything with mine. So you make me feel ashamed about my trauma. And I look at him like, dude, that is so insanely deep and crazy. But I apologize for what I did with mine, I guess. And let me see if I can help you out, do something with yours. And he's a friend of mine. I've been trying to help him out with his thing, with his whole situation. Um, but no matter how fucking deep you are in your own bullshit, whatever it is, for me, it's turning 40 alone on the road, uh, having a I'm not probably at a year now that I haven't had a relationship with anybody. So it's a lonely fucking life in a way.
Right.
I have a kid and I have a relationship with her, but that's about it. Uh, whatever your pole is, and sometimes we get depressed in our own bullshit. There's always somebody out there that has it worse or has it bad in a different way. There's something to be said about helping others as far as your own, as far as helping yourself. So yeah, all of this leads me to seeking out people that know their shit, seeking out people that have been through that themselves, and figuring out and adapting some of the solutions that they had to my own issues. Microdosing is a powerful tool. I think it's something that our ancestors probably knew about more than we do now. But for me, it has, and I'm not talking about, just taking mushrooms recreationally.
Right.
With any medication, with anything like this, if you're going to actually treat it as medication, you should call it medication, and you should treat it as such. If you want to take mushrooms recreationally, that's also good, I guess. But there should be an intention behind it. I think main aspect of the help that I've gotten through that substance has been through verify, make sure, and re-verify and recertify that my intentions are to get better or to figure out a way to heal or to figure out a way to process. And for me, at least, it's been a very big help.
No, that's that's outstanding. I mean, that idea of the intention, I think, is so huge because again, it also gives purpose to the medication. You're telling the medication what you'd like it to do, where you'd like it to focus. And I think that part of healing is often overlooked in some people. That was outstanding. I mean, that last part, there's so many guys in my world that need to hear that. And you really laid it out. I mean, that was very complete. I wasn't sure how you'd answer that question, and I really appreciate that because I know it's a big journey and where you're at. I got one more question, and then because I've taken a lot of your time, but I'm just curious. You often talk about and I just want to make sure people leave with the right impression of stuff. And you often talk about the Netflix Narcos and stuff because it's very popular in America and it's almost glorification of things. Can you explain, what the danger is of I mean, there's some obvious that I know of right away, but can you tell why that doesn't necessarily help tell the story?
You see aspects of the glorification and almost the Robin Hood depiction of some of these characters that I understand. They come from poor backgrounds, rural backgrounds. Some of them are They're good to root for if you're, on this level. But a lot of them, are responsible, if not directly, but indirectly, of the poisoning and murder of thousands of people. And the murder or the execution of children and women. I understand that also men are bad to execute, but I was raised Catholic and I have a different cultural perception of this. But a lot of these people that I've seen they're depicted in some of the Netflix series, and you can point at whichever one you want, and I could sit down and go over a laundry list of things that they've done that would make everybody here just want to vomit.
Yeah.
And it is surprising to me that some of these guys' stories can be out there, could be paid for. People look at them, people wear T-shirts of them, people reference them in a joking manner. And some of these people are actually responsible for more deaths and more carnage than a lot of the than a lot of people's in that 9/11 poster. It just didn't affect you directly, so it's fine. It's fine to watch on Netflix. Imagine declaring these groups as actual terrorist organizations. Do they fit the profile? I mean, they have their own politicians. They do political assassinations. They have an vested interest in certain people being in power in certain places. They have the ability to move across borders with weaponry and have been able to manufacture and construct weaponry that not only kills one person but many people. It's weapons of mass. We can talk about weapons of mass destruction when it comes to fentanyl, and if it's the same thing or not. It's different vector probably, but it's probably the same thing. They fit all of these categories, and yet they are people that we can we have Sean Penn that goes down and shakes the hand of one of them.
Right.
Yeah, and he's fine. He's out there somewhere.
In Netflix, in the Netflix document, and the Netflix, not documentaries, but the shows, they come off oftentimes as sympathetic characters.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
I get the art of it. I get the art, the glorification, the fun. I mean, monster movies are fun to watch, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I would tell anybody that has any doubts to come with me to Baja every I don't know, every few months I go down there, and to come looking for clandestine graves with some of the mothers of the missing, and ask them what they think about some of those series and the people that are portrayed in some of those series on Netflix and on whatever shows you want, and ask them what they think about them as they're looking for a finger bone of their loved ones, at least to know for certain that they're somewhere. In the end, there's villains on all sides. I worked for some very big ones myself. But when it comes to stories and when it comes to sides, I think there's a weird, interesting phenomenon in Mexico, and specifically with the fiction that you only hear about the one.
Right. No, it's a good thing for people to end on, because there's I just see this. I guess growing up in San Diego, also living in Tucson for a while, seeing a lot of the stuff on the border, seeing a lot of the real violence and the horrific stuff that goes on, that to in any way, shape, or form, glorify these guys as far as that is a dangerous thing. I think it really misses the message of the true, horrific things that have been going on. And we're already clueless enough. I don't think we need to further cloud ourselves with stuff like that.
Nobody's innocent down. Nobody's innocent in Mexico. From on both sides, from the people that I used to work with to the cartel. Nobody's innocent. That is clear. But there are people out there that are actually in the fight for the right reasons. I wasn't the only one there. There wasn't on the take. There were many people like myself. Some of them paid for their lives for not taking that money. You don't hear their stories. There's people out there that have to not live with their families for months because of threats, and you don't hear their stories. I remember the first dates I went on. I had to go on dates in San Diego because it wasn't safe to go on a date in Tijuana. And even
Wow.
in San Diego, I would look around.
Yeah.
Um, these people are out there. They're still out there. People like myself, people better than me in any way, in a lot of regards, who are still in the fight. I just, I want to leave this conversation with that aspect of it that doesn't get talked about. That there are good men and women in the fight down there that have horrible from their leadership and have horrible support on the bottom of them with their training and the people that are there in command of them. And they're going to come out of that situation probably to a very misunderstanding and negative population, just like I did. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's a pretty good idea to keep those people in mind. They're out there.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. All your contact information will be there for the work you do. But thanks so much. I know how busy you are and you're traveling. So what you shared today is going to really resonate with people. And look forward to maybe having another conversation in the future.